walked away
Yeah.
from my brand was Competitor Magazine. My brand was Muddy Buddy. My brand was Competitor Radio. And now I had none of it. And it was like, well, who am I? Who am I without this stuff? And if it wasn't for Heidi having that belief that you're way bigger than this other stuff, than a brand, you're going to go create new brands.
Welcome to Tools, Talents, and Techniques. I could not be more excited to have this guest, Mr. Bob Babbitt. And I would like you, Bob, to say a little bit about who you are before we get into the whole journey. We got a lot of stuff to cover. So could you give a brief introduction on who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Dustin. A pleasure to meet you the other day, and love your enthusiasm. Love everything you bring to the table. Name's Bob Babbitt, co-founder of Competitor Magazine, and my first world was publishing, and then co-founder of the Challenge Athletes Foundation. Challenge Athletes Foundation has been around 32 years. We've now raised $191 million and sent out over 52,000 grants to challenge athletes in all 50 states, 73 countries. And my favorite thing is 105 different sports that we've sent out equipment, training, travel expenses for. And that 105th sport was wheelchair pickleball. So it's been a great journey over the last 32 years. In the meantime, everything for me started with the Ironman triathlon back in 1980. And once I finished that race, I realized that I could accomplish a lot of different things in my life. And that led to Competitor Magazine, that led to Challenge Athletes Foundation, that led to the Muddy Buddy Ride and Run series, that led to Competitor Radio, that led to Breakfast with Bob, and a lot of other different things along the way. It's been a fun journey.
You know, there's a lot that you've done. It's funny when you say it like that. It's so linear. Like, yeah, I did this and that and this and that. And one of the things that when I knew who you were and I know about the Challenge Athletes Foundation to some extent, and you're one of those people that I was already excited to meet you and impressed by you. But when I met you, I was like, wow, you're even more than what I originally went into thinking. So I thought it was really cool, and we hit it off right away. I'm really excited about this. So here we go. Let's start from the beginning. Where are you from? Where are you from? And tell me about your childhood.
Wow. From
Yeah,
Chicago.
let's go back, Bob. Let's
Yeah,
go back,
going
Bob.
back a few years. From Chicago, grew up a pretty, I didn't think it was any different than anybody else, but we grew up in Chicago. My grandfather had an auto parts store called Babbitt Auto, and my dad and his three brothers ran the auto parts store. And we grew up in an apartment building where my grandfather owned the apartment building. My grandfather lived across the hall from myself, my brother, sister, and my parents. Upstairs was my dad's sister and her three kids. Downstairs was my dad's brother and his five kids. And the only other apartment, my grandfather was across the hall from us, and the only other apartment was for the babysitter who babysat for all the different kids in the house. So I thought everybody grew up that way, that it was like the Waltons. Everybody had a family that was all together all the time. And it was a little bit of a shock when I went to college, University of Illinois, and met people for the first time whose parents had been divorced, and then came to California. It just it was a little different. It was a little bit of a wake up call for me to see that people didn't grow up with all of their extended family living, upstairs and downstairs.
So with all those people growing up and you have all that, what was that experience like? And when you think back on it, like what were the challenges and what were the benefits of having that many extended family so close?
It was great because you saw your grandfather every day. You saw your aunts and uncles and cousins all the time, and they became, they're your best friends. Were the people you were living with, and it was cool. And I had learned from an early age that I didn't have a lot of skills, but one skill I had was I was the guy who was the organizer. I was the guy when we moved from Chicago out to a city called Wilmette. And if I wanted to play, I had to get other kids to play. So I had to go to Dustin's house and say, "Hey, Dustin, we're playing ball out in the street." And the first thing Dustin would say is, well, who else is playing? You don't want to be the first one. And oh, I got Jimmy, I got Donnie, I got Normie. And of course, then I got to go to their house and let them know, oh, Dustin's in, right? Because you don't want to be the first guy. You're not only going to come out if you know other guys are coming. So that was sort of a skill that was something that I realized early on, that stuff wasn't going to happen unless I made it happen. And that led to pretty much everything from that on. Was starting the magazine and interviewing athletes and all that pretty much came from that.
How old would you say you were when you realized this was a talent, or at least that you started doing these things?
I was like 9, 10 years old. I realized right then that was the thing. And it was organizing the baseball games in the street, organizing the hockey games. It was, finding a place to play. It was coaching the kids on the block in basketball and getting them together. And something that hit me very young is we would play on the street. We'd play basketball at this one guy's driveway, and a neighbor, one of the kids who played, his dad would come, and he was this huge, big cheerleader. And he made you feel so good about yourself. He'd be like, you've got radar, you hit every shot. And it just made you feel great. And I was like, you know what? When I grow up, I want to be that guy. I want to make other people feel that way, because I'm sure he felt great about it too. But I love the fact that he was sort of putting energy into me, and he was putting energy into the other kids. And I thought that was something really special. If you cared enough about other people to make them feel good about themselves, then they'll do that for the next person. That to me was something very special.
Is that something that you knew at that time, or is this something that you reflected on back as you've progressed in the different things that you've done?
Yeah, I think I didn't really realize it right at the time, but it didn't take very long before as I found myself doing what he was doing. I became the cheerleader at other people's games. And I was like, you know what? That's what Mr. Brown did. And it was something that always stuck with me. And to this day, his son is a close friend. And his son actually was on the Olympic figure skating teams, Jason Brown, and went to a couple of Olympic games. And it's just Mr. Brown was a huge influence on my life, and just the positivity that he always had. He always was positive, and there's no reason we can't always be positive.
It's something I think about fairly often when you talk about mentors in your life and people that have had an impact in what you do. And it's amazing where you can think specifically on these moments. And even though this one, maybe not one game that you were at, but somebody's way of being can in a way just be an example for you and be a mentor. Were there other people in that extended family or in your community that you've also looked back on and said, "Oh, like I get this piece from seeing that person or this person"?
You know what? My mom was into it. She was part of a charity called Infants Aid, and I remember her sitting in her office working on. It was a charity for premature children, for making sure that they were taking care of premature children. And just seeing how much energy she was putting into other people, that was pretty impactful. It was charity. Oh, and it wasn't charity. I didn't look at it as charity. I just looked at it as this is a nice thing. This is a good thing to do, because you're helping other people, but you're also helping yourself. You gain every time you help another person. You gain from that.
When you mentioned that you were the organizer, you're bringing in other people from the community to play sports, what were those sports that you were most drawn to? Because as we're going to talk about in this conversation, there's a lot of different things that you've done, but were there things that you were like, all right, this is my main sport and these other ones are just, tangential?
Well, for me, because I never really was a high school athlete or a college athlete. It was all recreational. But I loved playing baseball. I loved playing street hockey. I loved playing touch football and basketball. Just all the mainstream sports is really what I did until I got older and moved to California, and then was exposed to the sport of triathlon, which changed changed my life in a lot of different ways.
And so what was that transition when you moved to California? Like what were you doing before you made that move?
I was I graduated from University of Illinois, and then I was working at a residential treatment center for emotionally disturbed kids in a little town called Lake Villa. And my job was to mainstream kids they came from a variety of backgrounds. Some of these kids had been adoptions that hadn't worked out. I had one young man who had been abused by his father, cigarette burns up and down his arm. Then another young man who was taken out of the home. Uh, Residential treatment center, way that worked was if there was a child who was going to be taken out of home, they would start by putting him in a foster home. And a lot of times those foster homes were a lot cheaper than it was to put people in residential treatment. Back then I think it was like $25 a day to put a child in a foster care. It was $50 a day to put him in Central Baptist Children's Center, which is where I was at. And so what would happen is kids who had serious issues, and we're talking, I had a young man named Emmanuel who, when he was 5, 6 years old, and was in, he his mom would leave, and he was in charge of his younger siblings. And one day, one of his siblings wouldn't stop crying, so he pulled out a shotgun and shot him. He killed his younger brother. And so this young man, rather than put him in a treatment place with professionals, they put him in foster care. He like had 5 or 6 failures in foster care before they were desperate and brought him to us. So those kids, so you had some kids whose one kid, his parents died in a car crash, and he ended up in the same place with the young man who had killed his brother. So it was this mishmash of kids all together, and it was really a hard place to work because these kids were so needy, and there really wasn't the treatment that they should have been getting. My job was to mainstream these kids into Boy Scouts, Little League, things like that. And so someone like Emmanuel, the young man who shot his brother, in this structured environment, he did very well. And he went to a basketball camp and they loved him. They didn't know his background, but it made me realize that we all are, we're byproducts of our environment. You have loving parents who care about you and put you in Little League and you're so far ahead of the person whose family or parents are just horrific. And the thing that I would see is these kids were taken out of the home. The kid had been abused, cigarette burns up and down their arm. Well, nothing happened to the parents. The kid was taken out of the home. So the kid felt like they were the reason that they were taken out of the home, not the fact that they were abused. So it was a tough place to work. I was there for a couple of years and then came to San Diego and worked at a little private school called the Children's School and ran a PE program that was called Bob Time and just loved it. Just that's why I fell in love with teaching and running a PE program. And then I moved out here in '78, and that's when I heard about this little sport of triathlon. And so in 1980, had been an article in '79 about the second ever Ironman triathlon on the island of Oahu. And there was 15 starters and 12 finishers. And actually, the picture behind me is from the start of that race of the '79 Ironman. There was 15 people on the beach. And there was an article in Sports Illustrated, which was sort of the Bible at that time. And it was like a 10-page article about this event with only 15 starters and 12 finishers, but it talked about this 2.4-mile swim and 112-mile bike ride and 26.2-mile run, and it just seemed ridiculous, something that nobody could do. When we read about it, my roommate and I, his name was Ned Overend, he went on to become world mountain bike champion. But at that point, mountain bikes hadn't been invented yet. We were rock climbing, and we met rock climbing in Mexico, and we were doing some of the early triathlons here in San Diego in '78 at Fiesta Island. And we read this thing about the Ironman, decided, you know what, we're going to go get bicycles and we're going to go over there and do this silly thing. And it's not like you can go online and find out how this thing works, or even to register. You had to track down the owner of the event and call them, find a phone number for them and figure out how to get hold of them, and then fill out an application for this silly event. And I remember Ned and I going to the police auction to get bicycles, and my bike was $75 and the whole back end had been burnt in a fire. And I thought that since it was 2.4, 112, 56 and 26.2, I thought that you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, and rode back the next day. So I had pannier, sleeping bag, and tent on the back of my bike because I didn't think I didn't think you did the whole thing in one day. It was the silliest thing I ever heard of. And you had to have your own support crew. So when I get over to, I was on the island of Oahu, and I get over there and, you know, get out of the water. I'm tuning in my Radio Shack radio that I have on the front of the bike and listening to a replay of a Rolling Stones concert from Maui. And I'm riding along in mile 25. I see my crew on the side of the road, and they give me a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke at mile 25 with the bike. No, we had no idea about nutrition or any of that crap. And now mile 80, I got a root beer snow cone. End of the bike ride, I come rolling in at the end of the bike, and I see this bamboo mat set up and a boom box. And my crew were like, "How about a massage?" I'm like, "That sounds great." So I got like a 45-minute massage between the bike and the run. And just, we didn't know what we were doing. They actually had scales along the course. You had to get off your bike and even during the run and get on the scale. The whole thing was, if you lost 5% of your body weight, they pulled you out of the race because they considered it was dangerous, right? So, I finished the massage, and I'm waddling through Waikiki eating what I had given my crew, which was Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade. Waddling through Waikiki eating Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade. I get to the scale at mile 5, and I can hear the guy on the walkie-talkie. He's like, "Can you give me that again? The guy's gained 5 pounds. You can't gain weight doing this thing." So then I'm running along, and then we get to Diamond Head, and I'm running up Diamond Head, and the crew is behind me in a little Fiat convertible lighting up the road, and I'm running up Diamond Head. It's last couple miles of the race, and I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. I thought it was going to take me 2 days to do this thing, and I'm going to finish this thing in one day. And God, there's going to be bands at the finish. There's going to be cheerleaders. This is going to be the coolest thing ever. And as I come rolling in the Kapiolani Park, I see a chalk line on the ground, and I see a light bulb, and I sort of slow down, and I hear this voice in the darkness. It's like, "Hey, you." "Yeah." "You in the race?" "Yeah." "You're done." That was it. It was like no big announcer, no bands. There's one guy doing 1 hour push-ups in the park. That was it. But it was something about finishing that race that told me I could do anything. It gave me this business card that told me I could accomplish anything. So I went, and there was a local newspaper in town called the Running News, and I started working for the Running News and became the LA editor of what became Running and Triathlon News. As our sport started to grow, I told the editor, "Hey, this sport's going to be huge. You might want to think about changing the name from Running News and Running and Triathlon News." And I convinced the art teacher from the school, the children's school where I was teaching here in San Diego, to come work for the magazine, and she became one of the best photographers in the history of endurance sports, Lois Schwartz. And then in April of '87, the magazine closed down, and we're like, "What are we going to do? We're out of a job." So I went and met with two local publishers of magazines here in California. One was called California Bicyclist. The other was called Southwest Cycling. And I said, to both publishers, if we did something with the sports of running, triathlon, and cycling all together, we could do something really special. And both publishers said, we'd never put a skinny runner on the cover of the magazine. Sport of triathlon's a fad. It'll be gone in 5 years. This is '87, right? And so I came home, and friends called us into a meeting and gave us a check for $17,000 and said, "Go start your own magazine." So that Running Triathlon News closed in April. In June of '87, we launched Competitor Magazine. We had a little office on Jimmy Durante Road in a guy's garage under 10,000 pounds of bike racks, 200 square feet for $200. And we were in heaven. And every weekend, Lois and I would drive to LA and cover running events and triathlon events. And, I was living on friends' floors because we didn't pay ourselves for the first couple of years. But it was Fantasy Island for us. We got to cover wonderful people and tell great stories.
Did you have a knack or a talent for writing? Because when you talk about like, oh, I'm going to write for this, for this publication before, was it something that you ever found previously in your life that you liked writing stories or telling stories?
It's interesting. It goes back to what I said about that Bill Brown filling me up with enthusiasm, right? And making me feel good about myself is what Bill did. He believed in me before I believed in myself when he's saying, you're a great basketball player. And that's what happened with us. I didn't have a background in writing at all. And so when I was running that PE program, Bob Time in San Diego, I called the guy who had that running news magazine or newspaper and said, hey, I created this thing called the Iron Kids Triathlon. I went down to Mexico and bought some incredible Hulk banks that I'm going to use as trophies. And the kids are going to do a little triathlon where they're going to do an obstacle course, they're going to run, and then they're going to swim in a pool that's right here in the complex. I said, why don't you come out and cover it? And he goes, oh, why don't you write it up? I've never written anything. So go ahead and write it up. So I wrote it up, and he was like, you know what? I really like your writing. You have a flair for this. So says go create other stuff. So I created the Running Wino. I created the Reverend Campagnola Minister of Triathlism. I created the Old Fire of the Month, and something that always stayed with me. I was there for about a year when Mike called me into his office. Mike Plant was the editor. And he called me in the office and he has 2 piles of letters. All right. And he goes, the one thing you don't want to be in life is vanilla. And I've got 2 stacks of letters here. This stack says how freaking hilarious you are. And the Old Fart of the Month cracked me up. The Running Wino, that picture of him in the garbage can with the wine bottle, that was hilarious. This other one is, I'm an alcoholic. I can't believe you have a thing called the Running Wino. It says, the thing is that every one of these people took the time out of their day to read the article, sit down, write a letter, get an envelope, get a stamp, find a mailbox, and mail this. That's passion. Love you or hate you, that's passion. And if you're driving passion, you're doing the right stuff. So keep doing what you're doing. If I wasn't getting letters, that would mean that nobody gave a crap, that you were vanilla. They're like, that's okay. And you know what? That always stuck with me. You don't want to be vanilla. You want to be sprinkles. You want to be doing something that people will sit up and notice. And that became another great life lesson.
So as you're doing this and you're having these, because you mentioned the different magazines, the different publications that you're doing, how are you dealing with finding that path? Like which one, okay, this one's having success over here, or maybe I want to spend more time on there. Like how do you go through those decision-making processes?
Everything is passion. But what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about growing the sport of triathlon, right? So that became really important to me. That we had this little dinky sport. I mean, think about it. It started at Fiesta Island in San Diego, 1974. And the first Ironman was in 78. By 2000, we were accepted into the Olympics by 1994. So 20 years from when that sport happened for the very first time, we had been accepted in the Olympic Games. We premiered in 2000. So I loved that sport and I wanted Race Director to be successful. One of the things with the magazine that we decided early on is when we're talking about advertisers, the most important advertisers in the magazine are the event directors, right? So we had special rates for the event directors because I didn't look at that as advertising. I looked at it as content. I wanted people to pick up the magazine because they wanted to find out what there was no online. If you wanted to find out about an upcoming 5K or a marathon or a triathlon, it was in Competitor Magazine. And that actually led to the partnership with Rubio's and Jamba Juice. Because up until then, if it was a free publication, that free publication was, it was in a bike shop. It was in a running store. But my mentality was, how often do you go to a bike shop? How often do you go to a running store? How often do you eat? You eat a lot. So Ralph Rubio was kind enough, and he was actually one of my first sponsors when I was doing triathlon in the early 80s. And to this day, Ralph is a close friend. Well, Ralph and I did a deal where I put racks for the magazines in all the Rubios. We're talking, eventually he got to 140 some Rubios, but at that point it was like 20, 30, 40, 50. And so the mentality was, and the rack said, California's fittest food, California's fittest magazine. The idea was that most people who were 20 pounds overweight, they're not hiring a trainer, they're not hiring a nutritionist. But if they walk in, they make the decision that instead of having a Whopper for lunch, I'm going to have a Health Mex burrito, right? I'm going to try to eat well. So when they come in to Rubio's, they see the magazine and they flip through the magazine. They see a 5K, and once they put a number on, they're in my world. I've got them. They're going to be part of my world forever because you realize how wonderful that finish line is. How great it is to come across that line at 8 o'clock in the morning and realize that you've just changed your life. And it's something that you want to do forever because the endorphins that come with finishing a race and doing your run and ride and swim, it's life altering. So that's where that came from, and just understanding that you want people to pick up your magazine who've never done your sport before, because my job was to fill up the corrals for those race directors. If Dustin has a race, as soon as your race is over for this year, you've lost all the people. You're starting all over again. Maybe you got 10, 15% who come back, but you need to fill up that corral. That was my job. My job was to be at the races. I prided myself every weekend. I was out handing out magazines. 3,000 magazines a month is what I personally handed out. So that when someone would come up and go, competitor magazine, I'm not a competitor, because they thought it meant elite athlete. And I'm like, well, what time did you get up today? 4:30. And you're here and you just ran a 5K. Yeah. Well, you're a competitor. You're competing with yourself. You're competing with the course. Do you feel better about yourself? Yeah. You're in our world. So that was important. It was important for me to change the perception of my product. Competitor to a lot of people meant elite athlete. To me, it meant testing yourself, getting out and doing something maybe that you haven't done before. But being part of our tribe and being part of our family was what it was all about.
Where along the line, I want to make sure that we have enough time. I want to talk about Challenge Athletes Foundation,
Yeah.
because where along the line did you come up with the idea, or did you co-found the Challenge Athletes Foundation?
So through triathlon, we're covering all different types of folks. And there was a guy named Jim McLaren in 1985. He was an offensive lineman at Yale, taking acting classes in New York City. He was on his motorcycle going to class, gets hit by a bus, thrown 90 feet in the air, dead on arrival, lives, but loses his lower left leg below the knee. Comes back from that to run a 3:16 marathon with a walking leg, which was unbelievable, right? What you see nowadays with high-tech prosthetics, that's not what we had back then. There was one step up from Captain Hook. So this kid runs a 3:16 marathon, and then I met him in Hawaii at the Ironman. I was there with Competitor Magazine. Ironman became a big part of my life. I ended up getting inducted into the Ironman Hall of Fame, USA Triathlon Hall of Fame. And a lot of that was because I believed in the sport early on, and my goal was to grow it and make it special. And here comes this amputee guy going 10:42 in Kona, which is top 20% of everybody in the race, where he had to stop and pour sweat out of his leg as he's doing his race. So at that point, he's traveling the world. He's sponsored by Budweiser. 8 years later, 93, he's racing in Orange County, California. A van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. A guy's already an amputee becomes a quadriplegic. And I covered a lot of wheelchair athletes through Competitor. And the one thing I'd hear from them when, I'd ask them about becoming paralyzed, how did that change your life? It was, I'm 30 years old. Here come mom and dad back in my life. I was an independent adult. Now it's like I'm a child again. I've got my parents there. I've lost independence. I'm losing hope. I don't know what to do next. So our goal was, we're going to put on a little triathlon for Jimmy at La Jolla Cove. We're going to raise 25K and get Jimmy a van with hand controls to give him independence. That was all we wanted to do. We raised 49, thought our job was done. And then 3 amputee women came up to us and they're like, listen, it's great what we did for Jimmy, but did you know when you get injured, your health insurance covers a walking around leg or an everyday wheelchair? Nothing to do with sport is covered by insurance because they consider sport a luxury item. And you and all your listeners know sport is a huge part of who we are and what we do, and sport is something you need to have with you forever. So that's when Jeffrey Eskow, myself, and Rick Kozlowski got our 501(c) and decided if someone needed a piece of equipment, training, travel, expenses to stay in the game of life through sport, we'd be there forever and a day. And now it's $191 million later. 52,000 grants later. It's been an amazing journey, and it's totally tied to Ironman and triathlon, because one of my first calls was to David Yates, the president of Ironman. And I said, David, can you help with Jim? And they said, let me give you a Kona spot that you guys can auction off and raise money for Jim. And that, to this day, it's something we work very closely with Ironman. And we had Sarah Reinertsen became the first single above knee amputee woman to finish Ironman. Carlos Maleta and David Bailey, two wheelchair bound athletes, became a huge story because Carlos was a Navy SEAL who was shot in the back in Panama. And David Bailey was a supercross star making $750,000 a year back in 1986 when he was paralyzed doing motocross. And those two guys battled 3 years in a row in 1998, 1999, and 2000 at Kona. And their story became as big as any of the other stories there among the elite athletes because their stories were so rich and they were so deep, which is one of the reasons that I was first attracted to covering wheelchair athletes and amputee athletes. At Running and Triathlon News, there was a guy named Jim Knab. And Jim was an Olympic trials pole vaulter who was on his motorcycle, was hit by a car, paralyzed from the waist down, came back from that to win the Boston Marathon 5 times in the racing chair division, win the LA Marathon 3 times. And I was at his house doing an interview with him. And I don't know if I told you this story, Dustin. But I had his house and I looked down and there's a nickel on the floor. And I'm thinking, poor guy in a wheelchair probably dropped the nickel and can't pick it up, right? Can't bend down out of the chair. So I reached down to pick this nickel up for him, and it's glued to the floor. And Jimmy's drinking a beer, looking at me, and he's like, so Babbitt, you didn't think the poor cripple could pick up the nickel off the floor? He says, lesson number 1, don't ever underestimate anybody. And I'm like, lesson learned. I got it. So this guy would show up at these races with a Dalmatian skin suit on. And he'd show up at road races going, why is the runner getting the check? I beat him. Oh, I should be getting that. Right. And he went to different rehab centers. And what would happen at the rehab centers, I had one of our athletes by the name of Bruce Carnell was injured in a construction accident. He's in the rehab center and they're telling them, you need to get rid of your pickup truck. You need to get a van with a lift. These are things you can't do. You can't do this. You can't do that. And he says, Bob, I'm looking out the window and I see this guy drive up in a 62 Rambler convertible. And you probably don't even know what a Rambler is. And I see him reach behind him to grab his chair, fling the chair next to the driver's seat, dive into the chair, and then roll in and tell us, listen, they're telling you what you can't do. I'm here to tell you what you can do. And that was Jimmy. Jimmy was all about, there's no limitations. I can do whatever the heck I want to do. Yeah, I'm in a chair, but so what? Why walk when you can fly? Right? That was what he would tell wheelers. It's like, listen, quit looking at it as a negative. The person who wins a race isn't the one who goes the fastest. It's the one who slows down the least. He was just that guy. Why walk when you can fly became a big mantra. And so long before CAF, I created a wheelchair criterium in downtown La Jolla as part of the La Jolla Grand Prix bike race. The men raced and the women raced in downtown La Jolla, half-mile loop right there in Silverado Street, that whole area. In between, we had a wheelchair criterium where Jim Knab and David Bailey and all these top, Carlos Maleta, all these top guys raced. And it was the coolest thing because people got to see the top athletes in the world in racing chairs with the cyclists who were totally enamored with the equipment they were using. And so I brought in a flatbed truck with a lift on it and brought patients in from Scripps and Sharp and put it at one of the corners and had of our wheelchair guys go up and spend time with the rehab patients. And one of the rehab patients said something I'll never forget. I said, why is this important? He goes, it's important because I might not ever get to the level they're at, but it's great to know it's there. It's great to have something I can aspire to.
Yeah, and some of these lessons that you're learning from these people with this resilience, and you're helping them with what you're doing and the platform that you're providing and these connections, it's amazing. And I think about it sometimes when it's like how much you can be inspired by the people that you're the one trying to help, right? If I'm saying that, I mean, I don't sound, maybe that sounds a little
From
weird.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So, but I have a question that I want to ask you about, following that passion and where you get the energy from. Because when you saw triathlon, you were like, "There's something here. I'm going in. I'm doing it." And then when you started the Challenge Athletes Foundation, when you and your partner started to work on that, did you know off the like, yeah, they're doing this, or was there a certain time within that first, let's call it 3 to 5 years, where you're like, okay, yeah, we really have something, and we're gonna go all in on this.
Yeah, what was interesting is none of us worked for CAF, right? I was running Competitor Magazine. Jeffrey was working at the Tinley Company. Rick was putting on all the local triathlons. So we were on the board and we were overseeing, but we hired Virginia Tinley, her husband, Scott Tinley, two-time Ironman champion, and she became our executive director and was amazing. The first place we were in was Condemned. We had this little shack. We called it the Calf Shack over off of Jimmy Durante. It was next to this place where they had exotic birds. Virginia was our first employee, and then Tabby King was our second employee. These big birds would just walk into this house that was condemned. Tabby would be like on the phone, and some screeching bird would like walk into the middle of the middle of the room. It was crazy. Like early on, we had a really cool buy-in from some of the, like Mark Allen was six-time Ironman world champion, and he came to the first triathlon we did for Jim McLaren, and McKeely Jones came. So we had a buy-in from all the top celebrity athletes. And then when Robin Williams found CAF through Virginia and Scott Tinley, and he came to our event, that changed everything because
Mm,
all of a sudden Robin is there at La Jolla Cove for our event, and of course, every media truck is there because Robin is there. And what happens, and Robin understood this, the people come to see Robin, and then they see Rudy, and then they see Roderick, and then they see Jim McLaren. They see all of our athletes. They didn't come for them, but they left with them, right? They understood then why Robin was so passionate. Robin loved it. My favorite Robin is every year we'd be there at the Cove and they'd send the weather truck out or whatever. You know how they try to do the remotes from different locations, and knowing Robin was going to be there, they'd always be there. So this one reporter is like, "Do you think I can get a soundbite from Mr. Williams?" And Robin's whole thing was, "I'll do a soundbite if it's live." And they can't edit
mm,
it. So, anyways, I said, "Is it live?" I said, "Yeah." So I go to Robin, and Robin goes, "It's alive." Yeah. So, excuse me. She says, "So, Mr. Williams, sir, how's it going to feel like? What's it going to feel like when you finish that 56-mile bike ride?" "Is this live?" "Yes, it is." "I'm going to feel like there's a river of sweat like Niagara Falls running down the crack of my ass." That was like the coolest thing. And Robin, you put a microphone in front of that guy, it's like raw meat in front of a lion. That guy is going to be all in on that. And Robin, what was the best is people weren't looking to get photos with Robin. They were looking to just come up and thank him for being there. And when he passed away, he owned 80 plus bicycles. And when he passed away, the bikes were auctioned off for about $600,000, and half of that went to CAF, and the other went to the Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation, his buddy Christopher Reeves. I mean, Rudy became a part of the family. So Rudy would do the 1.2-mile swim. Robin would do the 56-mile bike ride, and Scott Tinley would do the 13.1-mile run. They were Team Braveheart. And for 11 years, those three were together doing our event. And that really generated a ton of awareness for who we are and what we did. The film Emmanuel's Gift, narrated by Oprah. I told you that story before, from the early 2000s. And that led to a ton of media. Bill Walton embraced us and was a huge supporter. Bill looked at us as kindred spirits because he'd had 36 surgeries. He considered himself a challenged athlete. His ankles were so screwed up, he couldn't wear bike shoes. He couldn't clip into a pedal. He had to wear just regular tennis shoes. So there's a lot of reasons for the growth over the years. And a lot of that is, I always tell people, you can't have a business plan for this stuff. this stuff happens. I mean, Jeffrey was like, we need to have an endowment. Sounds great. Okay, we're going to try to see if we can get to 10 million by 10 years, 20 million by 20 years, 30 million by 30 years. And every one of those we hit. And Jeffrey was one who pushed for a building. And that building, which I think cost like 1.6, $1.7 million, is probably worth north of $10 million now, totally paid off. And that spit out over $300,000 for grants this year. So being
Wow.
fiscally responsible has been a huge part of what we do, but it's also understanding that things happen organically. The Emmanuel story, those type of things, they don't happen without other people embracing your vision.
Yeah, and you know what? Part of that is especially partnering with the right people because everybody brings their own style, flavor, and having that balance and having those people surrounding yourself with the right people is so key. So it sounds like that's the perfect mix. As you know, your experience and your background, even going back to what you were saying about how you were getting people together to play sports, like you see how that manifests itself and perhaps Jeffrey come on the business side, like we should do this and that. And so yeah, it can't all be just on the spreadsheet. There's other things that are involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pretty amazing journey just seeing where it's gone. And I know that, the biggest challenge now is technology is so good. Someone like a Jim McLaren back in the day, there was no sport for quadriplegic. Well, now there's power soccer. Now there's tetra ski. Now there's off-road e-assist hand cycling. There's so many cool sports out there, but that stuff's expensive, and more so than a $4,500 wheelchair basketball chair. You've got a $15,000 off-road e-assist hand cycle. So right now we're sending out $5 million in grants for 2025. And easily, if we'd had the funds, we could have sent out 7 million. So that's the thing, is more awareness means more grant requests. More grant requests means more grants potentially that you can't fund.
You mentioned some of the people that were instrumental in partnering with bringing awareness and those things, and with Robin Williams and Bill Walton. And as a side note, I feel like I've really missed out on meeting Bill Walton. Like I, he was in the neighborhood. He was over here and there. We were like dancing around each other, but I never had the opportunity to meet him. I feel like it's a shame that I never got to meet him because I think I would have really liked
So
them.
here's my favorite Bill Walton story. Bill, there was a young man named Mac Johnson, was in college in Tennessee at a party, fell off a patio, paralyzed from the waist down. 6 months later, his mom wanted him to travel, get used to traveling with a wheelchair. So they decided to go to Arizona for the NCAA basketball championships. They get down there and they're out at Subway or Quiznos, something like that. And who do they run into but Bill Walton? And so Mac rolls over and says, "Mr. Walton, sir, can we get a photo?" And Bill's like, "Mac, what's your sport?" I said, "Well, Bill, I don't have a sport yet. I've only been injured for about 6 months. You need to move to San Diego, move into my house, and CAF and I will find you your sport." What celebrity talks to a total stranger in a wheelchair and says, "Move to San Diego, move to my house"? He did. He moved to San Diego, moved into Bill's house. Bill took him to the YMCA. They tried swimming. They tried all different sports. He loved wheelchair basketball. Bill makes a call. Mac plays at Auburn University. And that summer, when we were at the Summer League in Vegas, who do I see ushering at the Summer League? Mac Johnson. Mac went a long way to save, I mean, went a long way to save Mac's life, right? And Bill could relate because of all the surgeries he's had. The fact that he had to give up his career for a while he was laying on the floor with such horrific back pain that he couldn't work as a commentator. So Bill was actually, and one of the things that Bill did, he was part of our $1 Million Challenge bike ride down the coast every year, like 640 miles, 7 days. And one year, the weather was horrific. They had rain, hail, locusts. I mean, every plague known to man. And these are people who paid $12,500 to do this ride. 150 people at $12,500. And every morning they're sitting eating breakfast as the rain is pelting the hotel. And all of them are probably thinking, "I can't believe I'm paying the freaking ride in this crap." And then Bill would get up every morning at breakfast and put his arms up over his head and go, I get to ride my bike today. And it changed everybody's attitude from can't believe I'm riding in this crap to I get to ride my bike today. Because here's a guy who's had 36 surgeries and did not walk very well. If you saw Bill, he did not walk well. He could ride the bike, could ride the heck out of the bike. That was his salvation. That was his safety net, was getting on a bike and just riding. He could just be himself. And it's funny. First time I met Bill was his brother Bruce worked for us at Competitor Group and was one of the sales guys on Rock and Roll Marathon. And so I met Bill through Bruce. And every year I'd run our Rock and Roll Marathon in my Elvis outfit. I'd run as Elvis at Rock and Roll. And every year on 163, I'd be running it as Elvis, and Bill would be on his bike, like standing in the median strip there with his bike, and he'd be like, "Hey, Elvis. Hey, Bill." Like I think 10 years in a row, the two of us would see each other on freaking 163. Him on his bike, me and Elvis, and we just I've got a text that I will say for the rest of my life that I got like 3 days before he passed away. It was really special, and
Yeah.
I didn't know how sick he was at the time.
When you think about these experiences that you have and the relationships you've built over the years, and I'm really thinking about, as you say, that your relationship with Bill Walton, is there, first of all, let me say this: do you feel like your life has been successful, like the whole way through? Because I know you're positive. I know you feel fortunate, but have you felt like a success?
I think to me, my success when I first came out here from Chicago was one, wear long pants as few days as possible. I want to live my life in shorts. That's step number one. Two, don't ever feel like you have a job. Do what you love. Because my dad, he and his brothers ran an auto parts store. I knew that he was doing it because he was supporting a family. And I wanted to make sure you spend too many hours doing a job. It's got to be something you love. And it's got to be something you do, even if you're not getting paid. If I wasn't getting paid, I'd be doing the same stuff I'm doing now. I'd be interviewing athletes on Breakfast with Bob, and I'd be trying to line up fun media things for challenge athletes and going to the Paralympics. I mean, there isn't anything I do that I look at as a job. And so people are like, what did you do on the weekend? Tomorrow I'm going to the I'm going to the adaptive surf clinic down at La Jolla Shores. And then tomorrow night, Landis and Rudy and a few of our challengers, we're going to go to dinner in Fuegos in Del Mar. That's not a job. It's a passion. And that goes back to what Mike Plant told me all those years ago. If you're vanilla, no one gives a crap. I don't want to live a vanilla life. I want to live a life of passion. And hopefully, if you can impact other people and they are able to achieve their goals, it makes you feel good inside.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I asked that, because again, when you talk about these stories and it's so linear, like it just kept going, kept going. Has there ever been a time where you didn't feel like you were on the right path? And when
Well,
everyone,
yeah.
like you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't the way I want it to be, and I need to pivot and make some changes to get to the next step.
The thing that was, a lot of times you have your goals. Well, when we started Competitor Magazine, we never thought about selling. But then in '08, we were approached by private equity. And we actually starting in about '05, people started approaching us because we had, I had the magazine, the magazines. We were in like a number of markets around the country. I had my radio show on Mighty 690 and Mighty 1090. And then I had a series I created called the Muddy Buddy Ride and Run series, which was two people in a mountain bike and mud pits and inflatables. It was a total blast. So if you and I were partners, I'd start on the bike and go about a mile. At the mile, I had a 25-foot inflatable with a cargo net up the front and a slide down the back. I'd ride to that, do the obstacle, leave the bike, and start running. You are running to the same obstacle, do the obstacle, grab the bike, and ride by me. So we're leapfrogging, which means that I can wear a frog outfit, as I was, Mr. Frog. So
Makes sense.
then the last obstacle will be the mud pit. You wait for your buddy at the mud, and the course is 6 miles. So each person's running 1 mile, running 3 miles, 1 mile at a time, riding 3 miles, 1 mile at a time, going over 5 obstacles in a mud pit and going to the beer garden. So anybody could do this thing. right? Anybody could ride, and these were flat courses. I don't believe in big challenging courses. Fire road, flat courses, bikes that hadn't seen the light of day since Clinton was president. It didn't matter. You didn't need anything. I had one guy come up to me and he's like, dude, I might have got a medal, but I had to slow down at the inflatable because there was somebody in front of me. And I'm like, dude, I'm in a frog outfit. Last I checked, we're not on the Olympic program. You want a medal? I got one in my pocket. The beer garden's over there. And we built the beer garden like overlooking the mud pit so that people would be wrestling in the mud pit. And actually, during our time of Muddy Buddy, I think I officiated 8 or 10 couples getting married in the mud pit, which was a blast. So, anyway, that was the reason that we needed to sell was we had created 4 Muddy Buddies. And every time we added a Muddy Buddy for the 3 partners, this was myself and Lois and John Smith, it would cost us $100,000. And so we had a couple of options. One, and I knew since we only had 4 that somebody was going to come in and do 7, 10, 12 events and kick my butt. So either 1, we sell, 2, we get somebody to invest in us and probably screw us, or we continue down this path and someone's going to overtake us and come up with more mud related events, because we're really the first mud related event using bicycles. So I asked a buddy of mine who had started the Danskin Women's Triathlon Series, this guy, Greg Rourke. He actually offered, he said, listen, I know you're getting people are wanting to buy your company. I'll take that off your hands. Just send them to me and I'll source them to see if they're real or not, because you don't want to be giving your numbers to everybody. So he would come back invariably and go, big hat, no kettle. That was his line. Big hat, no kettle. And finally, when this group Falcon Head out of New York approached us, he said, big hat, big herd. So we sold. And so all of a sudden, this little company with 22 employees, all of a sudden it's 500 employees. All of a sudden it's 7 rock and roll marathons, 7 Muddy Buddies, 4 women's half marathon series events, Competitor Magazine, Triathlete Magazine, Velo News Magazine, Women's Running Magazine. It was and then all the new media. This is like 8, 9, 10. That's Facebook's coming in and all that stuff. So, we went from 7 rock and roll marathons to 34 between 2008 to 2012. We went from 7 Muddy Buddies to 18. So, you're talking 650,000 of people running the rock and roll marathon series, with 60% of those being women. Then our Muddy Buddies series went to 18 events and 40,000 participants. And, it was crazy time, and it sold again in 2012. And then, what happened, and when you talk about low points, so now I'm getting
Yeah,
good
for a second
paycheck.
I was like, where's the low point in this, Bob?
The low point is this. Okay, we've sold, we've got multi-year contracts, everything is smelling good. Competitor Magazine now is converted into a running magazine because they want to support the rock and roll marathon. So we lose what I believed in, which was triathlon and multi-sport and all those things together. They pulled us out of Rubio's and Jamba Juice. Why are we in places where people eat? We should just be in running stores. Then they closed down my Muddy Buddy series. We make more money on the photography at Rock and Roll than that whole series, even though it's spitting off $1 million a year. And then I had Competitor Endurance Awards, which was something that we'd created back in 1990, and they closed that down. So my wife, Heidi, who you've met and is one of the most honest people on the planet, she says to me, she says, you realize you're miserable, don't you? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, they killed your magazine. They killed Muddy Buddy. They killed your endurance awards. They don't want you, and you're miserable because they don't want you. They don't want anything to do with you. They don't believe in your ideas. They're killing everything you're doing. They're killing you from the inside. And so I quit and just left in 2014 and relaunched everything. I was scared. I was really scared. I'm like, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? So I had Breakfast with Bob, which we started in 2009, and just relaunched Breakfast with Bob. And this last year we did 203 interviews from all over the world with over 5.5 million minutes of viewing. But that was a scary time. I walked away from My brand was Competitor Magazine. My brand was Muddy Buddy. My brand was Competitor Radio. And now I had none of it. And it was like, well, who am I? Who am I without this stuff? And if it wasn't for Heidi having that belief that you're way bigger than this other stuff, than a brand, you're going to go create new brands. And we did. But
Wow.
it was scary.
Well, talk about full circle, and if I can draw some parallels here, I think about this a lot, especially when people, you know, age out or have to pivot from playing sports. Because I used to love basketball, and then I got into rugby, and I've had some injuries, like nothing to the extent of like for Challenge Athlete Foundation, I wouldn't believe. There's an identity, like you get attached to an identity, you identify with that thing that you're doing. So you having that experience, talk about the parallel to what the athletes have that you've been helping and over the years have experienced in a different way. But yeah, if somebody loves the sport, loves this thing, and you give them an opportunity, a platform, and you can help them rebuild that sense of self. And then here Heidi is showing you that, Bob, like here you are. That, I mean, that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
well,
It's
yeah,
beautiful.
because you look at it, you go, I am competitor, right? Competitor is who I am, right? If I was ever going to get a tattoo, it would have been, Competitor Magazine. He's the guy who started Competitor Magazine. That's what I was known for, and Competitor Radio. So all of a sudden, when you sell, and then Greg told us this. He says, listen, understand, nobody buys you because they believe in you. They buy you because they think you're a piece of crap and they can replace you tomorrow. And they'll take this company to another level that you can never take it to. They'll blow smoke and tell you how great you are, which is why they only want to do 1 year deals and why you need to get a multiple year deal. But
Mhm.
understand that nobody buys you because they believe in, we're just going to fund your vision. It says, never going to happen. Never going to happen. It's just not the way it is. So, that was important. And actually, it's funny you say that about recognizing that somebody needs your help. We had a woman named Jamie Whitmore who was a top at the sport called off-road triathlon. It's called Xterra. It's a swim, mountain bike, run. Brutal. The events up at Lake Tahoe, Flume Trail, up at 10,000 feet. It's a brutal sport. So, anyways, Jamie won 37 titles. One world title, 37 events around the world. The best. Those two women, her and Melanie McQuaid, were the best in the world. Well, she's having pain in the back of her leg, and they realize that she's got a tumor wrapped around a sciatic nerve. And when they cut that, she's not going to be able to run again. Jamie's one of the most competitive people I ever met. So I called her husband at the hospital and said, when Jamie is out of the hospital, please have her call me because we need to find her a new sport. And there's para sports, there's paracycling, there's para triathlon, para swimming. So she calls me and we get her into paracycling and she goes to Rio and wins a gold and silver medal. The interesting part about that is she kept getting sick and they kept telling her with the tumor, they kept telling her, we don't see anything. You must have a low threshold of pain. And you've ridden a mountain bike before. Riding a mountain bike up at 8, 9, 10,000 feet straight up, you don't have a low threshold of pain.
Hmm.
You're a beast. She was that person who, um, you know, even after they identified the cancer and treated the cancer, she kept getting sick and she couldn't figure out what was going on. Doctor said, just go in, get some tests and we'll figure it out. And so she goes in and they go, got great news for you. You're pregnant with twins. that was the that was why she kept getting sick. And so those twins were there at the Paralympics in 2016 as Jamie in her basically rebirth of a new sport for her, right? She was a great Xterra athlete. Now that was done. It was gone. And then she's becomes a two-time Olympic silver and gold medalist with her twins there watching in her next evolution, next part of her life. And now she's been 16, 20, she's been in the last three Paralympics in cycling
That's
and is
amazing.
just, yeah, but that's, people, I tell people all the time, we tend to come in a lot of times at the lowest moment of somebody's life. CAF does. And then we get to see that upwards trajectory. We get to come in and see what they're going to do next, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it's very telling of you to say we get to see it, and you're not saying like that you're a part of it. I mean, it's on brand for who you are and what you do, but I got to give you your flowers and your kudos because without people like you and your organization and those around your organization, maybe you're part of it. You're a big part of it. So thank you for everything that you do.
The cool thing is just seeing again. I think all of us, if you believe in somebody before they believe in themselves, you both win. You identify somebody you work with who doesn't have that quite that confidence level yet, and then they get that big sale, and you just see them glowing, and you know that you were a part of that. There isn't anything better. It's better than if you had done it yourself. You see them achieve it, and one of the things our athletes understand that we do it for them, and their job is to do it for the next. So there, I have this Parker Bird, the baseball player I was telling you about from East Carolina University. He was about to start his freshman year at East Carolina. He was signed his letter of intent there when he was 14 years old. He was like second best middle infielder in the state. And in 2022, he was supposed to start his freshman year in July. He was tubing, got thrown off the tube, swam back to the boat. Boat backed up, cuts his leg below the knee. The night before he has his leg amputated, he says to his dad, Dad, what does this mean? And Dad goes, well, Parker, it means you never play baseball again. And Parker's mom is like, wait, don't be telling our son what he can't do. And Parker's like, well, Mom, no Division I ball players ever played with a prosthetic leg. And Mom goes, but there needs to be a first, and why can't it be you? And it was. Last February, in February of 2024, he became the first Division I ball player with a prosthetic leg. Manager looks down the bench, the first game of the season. Everybody in the stands knows what's going on. He comes to the plate, standing ovation, draws a walk. They send in a pinch runner. He comes off another standing ovation. ESPN covers it on SportsCenter that night. World News Tonight covers it the next night. Next thing you know, this young man's social media is getting lit up. All these parents are wanting to bring their kids who are amputees or dealing with other things to meet Parker. And Parker right away knew that there was a bigger purpose in his life than being just a baseball player. And he brought us a young boy named JJ Reeder, who lost his leg to a bull shark, right? When he was 10 years old, lost his leg to a bull shark around the same time as Parker. And he's back playing baseball. He's got a shark embossed on his prosthetic leg. Took he and Parker up to the MLB network in January for both of them to receive their grants. And it was the coolest thing ever. But Parker's brought us like 4 or 5 other people that we didn't know about. These people and their families are now part of the CF family because of Parker. And that's what I love is our kids understand their job is to give back.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, Bob, you've been amazing. You've been gracious with your time. Before we take off, where can people find you? Whether it's a website, how do they find you? Uh, Let us send us out, and I'll include everything in the show notes of the actual show. But I want to give you this opportunity to share any parting thoughts.
So challengedathletes.org is the best place to go. Um, if people are, people actually in San Diego or anywhere else, we've got our big weekend, October 24, 25, 26, our San Diego Triathlon Challenge. It'll be our 32nd, 33rd, one of those. But this year we're back at La Jolla Cove. We're excited about 1 mile swim, 30-mile bike, 8-mile run. It's come out and join us. It's a phenomenal weekend. We'll have clinics, well, 150 challenge athletes from all over the world there. And one of the moms came up to me a couple of years ago. It's something I hadn't thought about. She goes, my son's an amputee, and we're in a little town in Nebraska. He's never seen another amputee. He's never, for 363 days a year, he feels like a freak that people are staring at him. And he comes here and there's legs laying all over the place. He's like everybody else. And I hadn't thought about that weekend and how important that is for the community that people gain there. Parents meeting parents, prosthetists meeting prosthetists, wheelchair athletes meeting wheelchair athletes, and they become friends forever and ever and ever. And then for breakfast with Bob, they can just go to Babbittville. All the social media platforms is Babbittville, and breakfast with Bob is we interview actually, we were just in Oceanside and interviewed a number of our CAF athletes there as well as the top pro triathletes. I love it when we have Michael Andreessen was the first person with dwarfism to finish Ironman World Championship this year. I scheduled his interview right before Patrick Lange, the three-time Ironman World Champion from Germany. So we get that great photo with the two of those guys together because it's all about, getting to the finish line. Doesn't matter. Get from point A to point B. Ironman and triathlon's an equal opportunity abuser. Doesn't give a crap. If you're missing a leg, if you're tall, if you're short, you get from point A to point B, you're a triathlete, you're an Ironman. That's all that matters.
Bob Babbitt, here we are at the finish line of this conversation. Thank you so
Thank you,
much for joining us.
Dustin. It's been such a treat. It was great to meet you at the Masters party. I appreciate the invite. I'm chugging the tequila right now.
Well, enjoy it. Like I said, don't drink it all in one sitting. It's
It's
not
beautiful.
not speaking from experience.
Of course not.
Of course
Thank
not.
you, Dustin. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the love and support for CF. And you definitely need to come by for a tour of the building and hopefully join us at October 24, 25, 26.
Yes, on all accounts.